Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nyedis Anarchy Series. I'm your host, Adam Callen, also the CIO of Nyedis, and I'm also formerly known as the IDM Rockstar. Now we're doing the whole Ravens blog thing because we're trying to tie in with the whole Nordic theme of our company. So today we're going to be talking about Passwordless. What is Passwordless? Well, Passwordless is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's authenticating using pretty much anything other than a password. And the big question then is, well, why would you want to do this? So companies over the years have finally realized that passwords are insecure. We've been spending decades, I think since like what, the 70s now, trying to figure out how to securely log in a user, how to authenticate a user into a system, and we've pretty much always been using passwords, some form of a username password, a handle, an email address, something along those lines, and it's always been, okay, now what? I forgot my password. I've lost my password. It's too complicated. We need to expire it. We need to rotate it. Your password is not strong enough. Your password is too weak. Your password's been discovered. Your password's been sold on the darknet. There's just so many issues with passwords that basically the large corporations that are really trying to protect highly sensitive data, especially the financial institutions that we work with, are just over it. Like, look, we just need to move away from passwords. These things are way too flimsy. We cannot rely on them to securely authenticate a user into our really secure systems. So this is where the whole idea of passwordless came into be. And I think the buzzword kind of came about because what is it that they're trying to sell? They're trying to sell that we're removing that entire ecosystem of garbage authentication into something else, which makes people go be like, I'm interested, please tell me more. I don't want to use passwords anymore. So now that kind of leaves this new era where everyone's excited about passwordless, everyone's introducing passwordless into their daily lives, but it's, like I said before, it's pretty open-ended. So passwordless can be a MFA authentication is passwordless. So, like when you go to log in, it says, hey, we've texted you a code to your phone. You punch in the code on the website, you've logged in. Well, that's passwordless MFA. Some companies and some applications, they've just completely bypassed the password and said, look, let's not even prompt them for a username and password anymore. When they come in, we'll just say, hey, look, you give us your email address or your username. We're just going to send you a code, and now you're logged in. That's a passwordless authentication. The other one that's also really popular that you probably use a lot is the scanning of a QR code, right? So you get onto your website, you log in with your username, sometimes username and password again for the first time, take your phone, scan the QR code, and then either you get a text message or most of the time it's an app, we get a push notification. Was this you trying to log in? Boop, yes. And then you're logged in. I would say that the QR code and kind of the push notification or a text message are probably the two most common passwordless authentication methods. Now, when you want to get into kind of the more server-based, the more restrictive, like you're not really logging into a SaaS service or anything. You're more like, hey, this is our day-to-day single sign-on or reduced sign-on model, and we want users to authenticate into Unix systems or into the Active Directory domain or along those lines, and we want to do away with passwords. Now we're going to do things a little bit different. So on the Unix boxes, when you're SSHing into a box, of course, people are used to username, password, SSH. Well, for the longest time, you could always log in using an SSH, using a key. So you can have a private key, and you can use that for login. Kind of like what we talked about before in our previous podcast when we were talking about Web3 wallets and how they're a public-private key infrastructure. This works the same way. So when you go to SSH into a server, you have your public key saved on the box in the SSD config file, and then you have your private key on your server. So what happens is when you SSH into the server, SSH-I, and you point to the certificate, then you log in just like normal. Then what happens is your server will then sign a message with your private key, send it back to the server verifies it against the public key it has stored, boom, you're authenticated and in. So now you don't have to remember usernames and passwords. You don't have to say, hey, I forgot my password. No one's going to take a picture of the password that you wrote on a little sticky note, and then someone else logs in as you. All that goes away because they'd have to have your private key, which would be stored on your computer. So private key, public private key infrastructure for logging into systems, also highly, highly effective. Another one that I would say is kind of the up-and-coming, highly recommended approach is a federated model of using a REST service for publishing certs for certificate-based login on demand. And the way this works is kind of like this. I'll kind of run through like a high model. Very similar to what we were just talking about. Like let's say you want to log into a Unix server, And before it was, okay, you have to have your private key on your computer, and then you have to copy the public key, put it into the config file on the server you want to log into, and now you can SSH in using your public-private key pair. It's not that hard, and there's lots of systems that will provision that out and set it all up for you. I mean, you got like Venafi, you got HashiCorp, all kinds of stuff that manages, certificates and keys like this for you. But there's a new model out now that's really interesting. And with one of our clients, we're actually talking about, hey, instead of looking at, removing passwords from all the servers, but maintaining all these accounts and maintaining all the certificates, because also certificates and they expire. Do we want the keys to be password protected or not? So here's this new model. The new model is, I don't know how to let's just go through an example. I think an example is the best way to describe this. So I have a Unix server. Let's say this is my Unix server that I want to log into. And this is my Active Directory domain. So when I want to log into this box, I don't know if you can actually see this. I'm going to put this here. So this is going to be the Unix server I want to log into, and this is my Windows Active Directory domain. When I want to log into the Unix server, what I do is I say, hey, I want to log in here. So what I do is I do a federated login to the Active Directory domain. So I contact my AD domain and say, hey, I want to log in. I'm given, username, password, or whatever that login mechanism is to authenticate myself into Active Directory. Active Directory will then give me a certificate. That certificate is what I will use to log into the server. Now the way this works is this server already has a certificate stored on itself for the CA of the Active Directory domain. So what's happening is my certificate is valid for a certain period of time, and when I present it to the Unix server will validate that cert back up to the CA server, say, hey, this is a valid certificate, again, all cryptography based, and then will let me in. So the only thing is I have to have an account on the server. So that means I have to have an account called Adam. There's no password stored on the server, but there is an account there called Adam. So now, even if someone gets onto the box, they'll never be able to get the password. They can't swipe the Etsy password file and brute force it. They can't even get onto my personal box and get my private keys because I don't have any. I'm literally authenticating against the AD domain in real time, present it with a certificate, I present that back to the Unix server validates it against the CA and the Windows domain, lets me in, boom, I'm in. You can take it a step further, because I know you're already thinking this, and you can actively provision the account and deprovision it on use as well. So now we're talking about ephemeral accounts. So with an ephemeral account, when I go to log into the server, Adam doesn't even exist on the box. So if someone were to attack this Unix server, there is no account to compromise. There is no account to log in as because it doesn't exist. Now when I federate my login to the Active Directory domain, then through this kind of ephemeral identity provisioning system, it will push this account, just the account, no password or anything else, just push the account to the Unix server, give me the certificate, and then I log into the box, and now I'm logged in and I can do the work I need to do. It'll also set up the group access and the rights and all that kind of fun stuff. And then when I'm done, or whenever it expires, the certificate will expire so I can no longer log in, and this account will be deprovisioned. So the box will then go talk to the Unix server and say, hey, delete that account. So now, this account only exists while I'm using it, and then even then, it's using only a federated certificate that was received for a short period of time from this Active Directory server. That's the new fun way to handle passwordless authentication into systems. So we've kind of talked about in the passwordless world, we have the text push notification for kind of SaaS-based stuff, which you're used to, scanning of QR codes. And then on the server base, we have the public-private key infrastructure, and also this certificate and federated certificate-based authentication systems. So the passwordless is definitely where we're going. Everyone's sick and tired of usernames and passwords. Everyone's tired of password resets. Everyone's tired of remembering the long, crazy passwords that they have out there. So passwordless is definitely the future. And I'm talking to you, Europe, because as I just found out, apparently passwordless is almost non-existent in Europe, which blew my mind. I was hanging out with a friend of mine from Ireland/Brussels. She's kind of all over the place. And she was telling us she runs a large identity practice out there. And passwordless isn't even on the radar for companies. So I highly recommend everyone in Europe, you guys can be on the front lines of this. Check out passwordless authentication. There's tons of resources out there. Highly recommend it. So that's kind of the breakdown of passwordless solutions. Obviously, this is where the whole world is going. Europe, I'm looking at you. Please look into this because I don't want you guys getting left behind on this one. You guys can really adopt and move forward with this, especially with you guys kind of pushing forward on the self-sovereign identity, which also we talked about in the previous podcast. So if you're not familiar with self-sovereign identity or decentralized ID, check out the podcast right before this one. And in there, we'll talk all about that. In the meantime, if you're new, also I'd love for you guys to subscribe to our podcast. There's a button or a little link around here somewhere. Go ahead and click on that. This way you'll get alerts every time we publish a new podcast. We're trying to make this as regular as possible. Obviously, we're all busy people, but I want to try to make these quick and easy and get it out to you kind of at a regular time. You can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. We're Nyedis IAM, Nyedis IAM on pretty much everywhere. So we're trying to use that as our little moniker. For where you can find this podcast, obviously wherever you're watching or listening to it now, but YouTube is where we're putting up the videos primarily. And then from there, we're also on Spotify, we're on Audible, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I mean, we're on all the podcasts. And if there's one that you want us to be on that we're not, hit me up. We'll jump on there. As usual, if you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up, adam@nyedis.com. I'll answer any questions that you have. Also in the comments, we reply back here. Post anything that you want to hear about down below. Any topics you want me to cover next, please. I'm looking for stuff to talk about. And if you want to come onto this podcast, hit me up as well. Just shoot me an email or somehow get me your contact info. And from there, we'll get you on and we'll interview. But in the meantime, I'm going to take off. I'm going to let you guys go. I'll see you guys later. This is the Nyedis Anarchy Series.